In the quiet dining room of a modest Millbrook home, a 78-year-old grandmother was about to face crushing disrespect. What started as Sunday family dinner took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her grandson's bitter dismissal. Amara Smith wasn't your typical elderly retiree. For decades, she had quietly built a financial empire through shrewd investments, known for turning modest savings into substantial wealth. When Marcus claimed she, quote, didn't understand real money, she had no idea this moment would test everything about family and generosity. Amara's dignified silence would lead to a revelation that shook her family to its core. What began as frustrated outburst would become a lesson in respect and wealth's true meaning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon light filtered through Linda Smith's dining room curtains, casting long shadows across the mahogany table that had seen 28 years of family meals. Steam rose from the pot roast in the center, mingling with the scent of fresh bread and the subtle anxiety that always seemed to permeate these Sunday gatherings. Amara Smith sat quietly at her usual spot, her weathered hands folded in her lap, watching her family with eyes that had learned to see more than they revealed. "Emma, honey, could you grab the salt?" Linda's voice carried that particular pitch that meant she was trying too hard to keep everything pleasant. At 52, she still moved through her own home like a guest hoping not to overstay her welcome. 16-year-old Emma Johnson reached across the table with the easy grace of someone who'd spent the last year navigating these family dynamics. "Here, Aunt Linda." Her voice held the careful neutrality she'd perfected since moving in with the Smiths while her mother traveled for work. She caught Amara's eye and offered a small smile, the kind of communication that passed between them regularly, two observers in a family that often forgot they were watching. Michael Smith carved the roast with the methodical precision he brought to everything, his electrician's hands steady despite the ache in his lower back that had been getting worse each week. "So Marcus finally decided to grace us with his presence," he said, glancing toward the empty chair. "Though I suppose he's probably stuck in traffic from that fancy apartment of his." "Dad, come on!" Ashley looked up from pushing food around her plate, her artist's eye automatically cataloging the way the light caught the worn spots on the table's finish. At 28, she'd mastered the art of defending her brother while simultaneously resenting him. "He said he'd be here by 4. Linda's laugh held too much relief. "Well, you know how traffic can be on Sundays." Everyone driving back from the front door slammed with enough force to rattle the dishes, followed by the rapid-fire staccato of expensive leather shoes on hardwood. Marcus Smith burst into the dining room like a man fleeing something, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his tie askew. Sorry. He kissed Linda's cheek and squeezed Michael's shoulder before dropping into his chair. "Client emergency." Some crypto kid thought he could outsmart the market and lost half his portfolio overnight. Amara studied her grandson as he settled in, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted to his phone even as he tucked it away. At 26, Marcus carried himself with the careful confidence of someone still figuring out who he was supposed to be. "Crypto," Michael muttered, passing the potatoes. "Back in my day, if you wanted to gamble, you at least had the courtesy to drive to Atlantic City." "It's not gambling, Dad. It's—" Marcus caught himself, forced to smile. "Never mind. This looks amazing, Mom." They fell into the rhythm of family dinner, the comfortable dance of passing dishes and filling silence with safe topics. Emma talked about her upcoming SATs. Ashley mentioned a small gallery show she was hoping to get into. Michael complained about the new safety regulations at work. Linda worried aloud about everything and nothing. But Amara watched Marcus. She saw how his jaw tightened when Ashley mentioned her student loans, how his fingers drummed against his thigh when Michael talked about the possibility of early retirement, how his eyes kept drifting to his phone as if salvation might arrive via text message. "The Hendersons are selling their house," Linda offered, desperate to fill a growing lull. "Can you believe they're asking $350 for that little place? When we bought this house, you could get something twice the size for—" "Everything's expensive now," Marcus cut in, his voice sharp. "Housing, food, gas. And don't even get me started on student loans." He stabbed at his roast with unnecessary force. $867 a month. Every month. For the next 15 years. The table went quiet. This was territory they'd navigated before, but something in Marcus's tone suggested they were heading somewhere new. "It's an investment in your future," Linda said gently. "Your education is a piece of paper that's supposedly worth $127,000. Marcus's laugh held no humor. "You know what I could do with that money? Real investments. Property. Building actual wealth instead of paying interest to some faceless corporation." Michael set down his fork. "Son, we all have obligations." "That's just it, Dad. You had obligations. Your generation could afford them." Marcus's voice rose, the careful composure he wore at work dissolving in the safety of family frustration. "You bought a house at 25. Mom went to school when it cost actual money you could count without needing a calculator. Gran probably doesn't even know what compound interest means." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one had seen coming. Amara felt them settle around her, each syllable a small weight on her chest. She'd been watching this moment build for months. Marcus's growing desperation, his increasing resentment toward anyone who seemed to have life figured out. "Marcus!" Ashley's voice carried a warning, but he was beyond hearing it. The frustration of months of financial pressure, of trying to maintain an image he couldn't afford, of feeling trapped by choices he'd made in pursuit of success. It all came pouring out. "I'm serious. Gran clips coupons and drives a car older than Emma. She probably thinks a good investment is a savings account at the local bank." He gestured toward Amara, who sat perfectly still. "No offense, Gran, but your generation had it easy. Houses cost what cars cost now. College was something you could pay for with a summer job. You didn't need to understand real money because everything was cheap." The silence that followed felt different from the comfortable quiet of before. This was the silence of held breath, of words that couldn't be taken back, of a line being crossed that everyone could see but no one knew how to retreat from. Emma stopped eating. Ashley stared at her brother with something approaching horror. Linda's mouth opened and closed without sound, while Michael's face flushed red. Amara simply looked at her grandson, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was soft, measured. "Perhaps you're right, Marcus. Perhaps I don't understand real money. I didn't mean." Marcus started, but the damage was clear in his grandmother's steady gaze. "Of course you didn't." Amara folded her napkin with deliberate care. "If you'll excuse me, I think I'm more tired than I realized." She rose from her chair with the dignity of someone who'd learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful response was no response at all. Michael started to stand, but she waved him back down. "Please finish your dinner." "It's wonderful, Linda." She collected her purse from the side table, her movements measured and calm. "Marcus, I hope you figure out that real money situation." The front door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than Marcus's earlier entrance. Through the window they watched her walk to her 15-year-old Honda Civic, her back straight, her pace unhurried. Marcus stared at his plate, the food suddenly tasteless in his mouth. The financial pressure that had been crushing him for months seemed to intensify, but now it was accompanied by something else, a cold knot of shame that settled in his stomach. "Well," Emma said quietly, "that was spectacularly stupid." "Emma," Linda warned, but her heart wasn't in it. Ashley pushed back from the table. "I can't believe you just said that to her." "I was frustrated, okay? The loans are killing me, and everyone acts like I should just handle it quietly like an adult." Michael's voice carried an edge that made Marcus look up. "Like your grandmother did when your grandfather died and left her with nothing? Like she's done for 12 years without asking anyone for help?" "Dad, I didn't know." "You didn't know because you never asked." Michael stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Your grandmother has more class in her little finger than you showed in that entire speech." As the family scattered, Ashley to her room, Emma to her homework, Michael to his garage workshop, Linda began clearing the table with shaking hands. Marcus sat alone with his plate of cold food and the growing realization that his grandmother's quiet dignity, in the face of his disrespect, might have been more telling than anything she could have said. Outside, Amara sat in her car for a long moment before starting the engine. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, steady despite the storm of emotions churning beneath her careful composure. Marcus's words echoed in her mind. Real money. Your generation had it easy. Probably doesn't even know what compound interest means. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth, not of amusement, but of something deeper. Something that spoke of lessons learned and decisions made. Something that suggested Marcus was about to discover just how much his grandmother understood about real money. The Honda's engine turned over with a soft purr, and Amara pulled away from the curb. In her rearview mirror, she could see the warm glow of Linda's dining room windows, the family she'd left behind grappling with the aftermath of words that couldn't be unsaid. But Amara was already thinking ahead, her mind calculating numbers and possibilities with the precision of someone who'd spent decades turning modest means into something much more substantial. Marcus wanted to understand real money? Tomorrow, she decided, would be an excellent day for his education to begin. Marcus's hand pressed against his throbbing temple as consciousness crept back through the haze of too much wine and regret. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed accusingly. 6:47 a.m. He'd barely slept, his grandmother's quiet dignity haunting every attempt at rest. The memory of her soft-spoken, "Perhaps you're right, Marcus," echoed in his skull with more force than any shouted rebuke could have managed. Rolling over in his overpriced memory foam mattress, he stared at the ceiling of his downtown apartment, the one that ate up 40% of his monthly income, because it had the right address and floor-to-ceiling windows that impressed dates. Everything in his life was carefully curated to project success, from the leased BMW in the parking garage to the designer suits hanging in his walk-in closet. But this morning, surrounded by the trappings of his manufactured prosperity, Marcus felt nothing but shame. His phone buzzed with work emails and cryptocurrency alerts, but he couldn't focus on the screen. Instead, his mind replayed the dinner, searching for the moment when his frustration had transformed into cruelty. When had he become the kind of person who would humiliate an elderly woman for the crime of suggesting moderation? 6 miles away, in a kitchen that hadn't been renovated since 1987, Amara Smith sat with her morning coffee and surveyed a very different kind of screen. Her 15-year-old laptop, a Dell she'd bought refurbished, displayed a dashboard that would have made Marcus's fintech colleagues weep with envy. Portfolio values, dividend schedules, bond maturity dates, and real estate investment trusts arranged in neat columns that told the story of 40 years of patient, methodical wealth building. The numbers were substantial, more than substantial. As of this morning's market open, Amara's net worth stood at just over $3. $2 million, not counting the house she'd owned outright for 30 years, or the modest pension from her decades as a bookkeeper at Henderson Manufacturing. She sipped her coffee, store brand, purchased with a coupon, and let her mind drift back to the beginning. To Harold's funeral 12 years ago, when she'd sat in this same kitchen with a life insurance check for $47,000 and a bone-deep determination never to be financially vulnerable again. She'd been 66 then, with no family wealth to fall back on and children who were just starting to hit their own economic stride. The memory was sharp as winter air, driving to the library to check out books on investing because she couldn't afford to buy them. Spending nights at this same table, teaching herself about compound interest, risk tolerance, and asset allocation while Harold's chair sat empty across from her. Learning that the stock market wasn't gambling if you did your homework, diversified your holdings, and had the patience to think in decades rather than quarters. Her first investment had been $5,000 in an index fund, money that had made her hands shake as she wrote the check. Now that same investment, with reinvested dividends and additional contributions, was worth over $200,000. The lesson hadn't been lost on her. Time and consistency could transform modest sums into life-changing wealth, but only if you had the discipline to live below your means and the wisdom to ignore the noise. The phone rang, interrupting her reverie. "Mrs. Smith, this is Jennifer Chen from Brookstone Financial. I have your request ready for review." "Thank you, Jennifer." Let's go over the details. Amara's voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to managing significant sums. For 20 minutes, they discussed the liquidation of specific holdings, tax implications, and wire transfer procedures. When she hung up, the wheels were already in motion. Her next call was to First National Bank, where she'd done business for 4 decades. "Mr. Rodriguez? It's Amara Smith. I need to arrange a cash withdrawal." She paused, letting the gravity of the request settle. $127,000. Today. There was a silence on the other end that spoke volumes about the unusualness of such a request. "Mrs. Smith, are you certain? That's a very large amount of cash to—" "I'm certain. I'll be in this afternoon to complete the paperwork." As she ended the call, Amara felt a mixture of determination and sadness. The money Marcus owed was real. She'd seen the loan statements he'd carelessly left on Linda's kitchen counter during previous visits. The interest rate was predatory, the monthly payments designed to keep borrowers trapped in a cycle of debt that would stretch well into middle age. It was exactly the kind of financial prison she'd sworn never to enter herself. But it wasn't really about the money. Marcus's words from the night before had revealed something deeper, a fundamental misunderstanding of what she'd accomplished and why. To him, she was just another old woman whose quaint frugality was a relic of easier times. He couldn't see the strategy behind her clipped coupons, the decades of research behind her modest lifestyle, or the quiet pride she took in having built something meaningful from nothing. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Marcus was discovering that hangover regret could be its own form of education. He'd tried calling his grandmother twice, but each time he'd hung up before completing the number. What could he say? That he was sorry? That he'd been stressed about money and had taken it out on the person least deserving of his anger? That his entire worldview of financial success was apparently built on assumptions about others that might be completely wrong? The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd lectured a woman about money while sitting in an apartment he couldn't afford, wearing a watch that had required 3 months of payments, fresh from losing $200 in cryptocurrency speculation the night before dinner. His grandmother, meanwhile, had probably never owned anything she couldn't pay for in cash. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He pulled up his student loan account on his phone, staring at the balance that had become his personal monster, $127,462.18. The number never seemed to go down, no matter how much he paid each month. Principal, interest, fees. It was a mathematical hydra that grew new heads faster than he could cut them off. At his current payment rate, he'd be 51 years old when he made the final payment, assuming he never missed one and interest rates never rose. Marcus set the phone aside and walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at a city where everyone seemed to be racing toward a finish line no one could clearly see. Below, people hurried to jobs that paid well enough to maintain the illusion of prosperity while keeping them trapped in cycles of debt and obligation. He'd become one of them without realizing it, so focused on looking successful that he'd forgotten what actual success might feel like. The shame was deeper now, mixed with a growing understanding of just how badly he'd misjudged not just his grandmother, but the entire nature of financial wisdom. Real money, he was beginning to suspect, might have less to do with how much you spent and more to do with how much you kept. By 10 a.m., Amara had completed her morning routine, a walk around the neighborhood, breakfast of oatmeal and fruit, and 30 minutes reading the financial news on websites that Marcus probably assumed she'd never heard of. She dressed carefully. Her good gray suit, the one she'd worn to parent-teacher conferences and bank meetings for 30 years. Today felt like an occasion that warranted looking serious. The drive to First National took her past Marcus's apartment building, all glass and steel and monthly fees that could have bought a car. She didn't look up at his windows, but she thought about the young man who'd been so certain of her ignorance the night before. By evening, he would understand that assumptions could be expensive things, and that sometimes the quietest people had the most to say. At the bank, Mr. Rodriguez handled her request, with the discretion that came from managing the accounts of people who'd learned to accumulate wealth quietly. The paperwork was extensive, the questions thorough, but within 2 hours Amara walked out with a briefcase containing more cash than most people saw in a lifetime. The briefcase was Harold's leather worn smooth by decades of carrying work documents to and from the manufacturing plant where he'd supervised quality control. It seemed fitting that it would carry their life's work toward a lesson about respect, family, and the difference between appearing wealthy and actually being so. As she drove toward Marcus's apartment, Amara allowed herself a small smile. Her grandson wanted to understand real money. This afternoon, his education would begin in earnest. The only question was whether he'd be wise enough to learn from it, or proud enough to miss the point entirely. The briefcase sat heavy on the passenger seat beside her, filled with more than money. It carried decades of sacrifice, patience, and the quiet dignity of a woman who'd never needed anyone to validate her understanding of what truly mattered. Marcus had dismissed her wisdom once. He wouldn't get the chance to do it again. The knock on Marcus's door came at precisely 2:17 p.m., interrupting his third attempt to draft an apology text to his grandmother. He'd been staring at his phone for the better part of an hour, typing and deleting variations of "I'm sorry" that all felt inadequate for the magnitude of his disrespect. Through the peephole, he saw Amara standing in the hallway, her gray suit immaculate, a leather briefcase in her right hand. She looked like she was attending a business meeting rather than visiting her grandson's apartment. The sight of her sent a fresh wave of shame through his chest. "Gran?" He opened the door, still in yesterday's rumpled shirt and sweatpants. I wanted to call you, but may I come in, Marcus?" Her voice carried the same measured calm from the night before, but something in her posture suggested this wasn't a social call. He stepped aside, suddenly conscious of the expensive chaos of his apartment. The leather sectional that cost more than most people's cars, the 75-inch television mounted on the wall, the kitchen island cluttered with delivery containers from restaurants that charged $30 for what his grandmother could make for $5. Amara walked to the center of his living room and set the briefcase on his glass coffee table with deliberate precision. The sound it made, heavy, substantial, seemed to echo in the silence. "Gran, about last night, You said I didn't understand real money." She looked around his apartment, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city view, the carefully curated symbols of success. "You were quite passionate about it." Marcus felt his face flush. "I was frustrated, and I took it out on you. That was wrong. I'm sorry." "Are you?" Amara's fingers rested on the briefcase's brass clasps. "Or are you sorry you were rude, but still convinced you were right about the substance?" The question hung between them, sharp as a blade. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. Because wasn't that exactly what he'd been thinking? That his grandmother was a sweet woman who deserved respect, but who simply couldn't understand the financial pressures of modern life. "I thought so." Amara opened the briefcase. Marcus had expected papers, maybe family photos she wanted to show him. What he saw instead made his knees buckle. Stacks of $100 bills, organized with the precision of a bank vault, filled every inch of space. More money than he'd ever seen outside of movies, sitting casually on his coffee table like groceries she'd brought to share. "What?" His voice cracked. "Gran, what is this? $127,000. She said it the way she might announce the weather. "The exact amount you owe in student loans, according to the statements you left on your mother's counter last month." Marcus stared at the money, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. How do you have 43 years of compound interest? Amara sat on his expensive sofa, her hands folded in her lap. "When your grandfather died, I had $47,000 and a choice. I could spend it maintaining the lifestyle we'd built together, or I could learn to build something larger." She gestured toward the briefcase. "I chose to learn. Every book on investing I could find, every financial website, every earnings report, every market analysis. I started with index funds because they were safe and cheap, then REITs, blue-chip dividends, some carefully selected growth stocks. Nothing flashy, nothing risky. Just patient, methodical wealth building." Marcus felt like he was listening to someone speak a foreign language. This was his grandmother. The woman who clipped coupons and bought generic brands and drove a car older than some of his coworkers. Your net worth, he whispered. What's your actual net worth? As of this morning's market close? 3.2 million, not counting the house. She said it with the same tone she'd used to mention she needed milk from the store. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been lecturing a millionaire about financial literacy. He'd explained compound interest to someone who'd been living off dividend income for years. The arrogance of it, the sheer, breathtaking ignorance, made him want to disappear into his overpriced furniture. I don't understand. His voice was barely audible. If you have that much money, why do you live like what? Like someone who understands that wealth isn't about what you spend, but what you keep? Amara's tone sharpened slightly. I live below my means because that's how you build real wealth, Marcus. Every dollar I don't spend on things I don't need is another dollar working for me in the market. She stood and moved to his kitchen, where she picked up a delivery container from the previous night. $43 for pad thai. I can make the same dish for $6, and it tastes better. You spent in one meal what I spend on groceries for 3 days. Which one of us understands real money? Marcus slumped into a chair, his worldview crumbling around him. Everything he'd thought he knew about financial success, about his family, about himself, was being systematically dismantled by a 78-year-old woman who'd just casually produced more cash than he'd earned in 3 years. The briefcase, he managed. You're not actually giving it to you? I am. Amara returned to the sofa. Your loans are paid off, Marcus. Every penny. Consider it a graduation gift, 12 months late. The relief that should have flooded through him was overwhelmed by something else. A crushing weight of obligation, of understanding just how thoroughly he'd misjudged everything. Gran, I can't accept this. Not after what I said, not after. After you told me I didn't understand real money? Her smile was sad but not unkind. This isn't about what you said, Marcus. This is about what you didn't understand. About what none of you understand. She closed the briefcase and pushed it toward him. Your family thinks I'm struggling because I choose to live simply. They offer to help with groceries, worry about my heating bills, treat me like a burden they need to manage. Do you know how that feels? To have built something meaningful and have the people you love most assume you're failing? Marcus felt tears threatening. The money sat between them like an accusation, representing not just his debt relief, but his complete failure to see the woman who'd raised him as anything more than a stereotype. I don't know what to say. He looked at his grandmother, really looked at her, and saw someone he'd never noticed before. Someone who'd quietly conquered challenges he was still struggling with, who'd built a fortune while maintaining relationships, who'd achieved everything he claimed to want while living with a humility he'd never learned. Say you'll think before you assume next time. Amara stood, gathering her purse. Say you'll remember that wisdom doesn't always announce itself with expensive clothes and flashy cars. She paused at his door, turning back with an expression that mixed love with disappointment. The money comes with one condition, Marcus. You figure out what real wealth actually means. Because right now, sitting in this apartment that costs more than most people's yearly salary, drowning in debt you created chasing an image of success, you don't have a clue. The door closed behind her with the same quiet dignity she'd shown at dinner, leaving Marcus alone with $127,000 in cash, and the devastating realization that everything he'd thought he understood about money, family, and success had been built on a foundation of ignorance and arrogance. He stared at the briefcase, understanding finally that his education in real money was just beginning. Marcus stared at the briefcase for 23 minutes before his hands stopped shaking enough to close it. The weight of $127,000 in cash was nothing compared to the weight of understanding what it represented. Not just his freedom from debt, but the complete collapse of every assumption he'd built his adult life around. His first instinct was to share the moment, to capture this impossible reality and broadcast it to the world. He pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the money, fingers flying across the keyboard. You guys won't believe what just happened. My grandmother just paid off my student loans in cash. Turns out she's been secretly rich this whole time and I had no idea. His thumb hovered over the post button for a long moment before the magnitude of what he was about to do hit him. This wasn't his story to tell. This was Amara's private business, her carefully guarded secret that she'd revealed to teach him a lesson, not to become social media content. He deleted the post. Then he took another photo. Then he deleted that one too. On the third attempt, he managed to get as far as tagging his sister before his conscience finally won. But not before Ashley had seen the notification. Her phone buzzed while she was touching up a canvas in her cramped studio apartment, the converted garage behind her parents' house that she'd moved back into 6 months ago, when her credit cards finally reached their limits. The notification disappeared before she could read it fully, but she'd caught enough words to make her stomach drop. Student loans. Paid off. Grandmother. She tried calling Marcus immediately. Voicemail. She tried texting. No response. Meanwhile, across town, Linda Smith was having what she would later describe as the worst Monday of her professional life. 3 students had been suspended for fighting, the principal was questioning her conflict resolution methods, and she'd just discovered that her own student loan payment had bounced because she'd miscalculated their checking account balance by $47. Her phone rang during her lunch break, Ashley's name flashing on the screen with an urgency that made Linda's chest tighten. "Mom, what do you know about Gran's money situation?" Ashley's voice was strained, talking fast the way she did when anxiety took hold. "What do you mean? You know she gets by. Why?" Marcus posted something about student loans and Gran, then deleted it. "I think something's happened." Linda's mind immediately went to the worst possible scenarios: medical bills, foreclosure, some kind of financial emergency that would require the family to rally around Amara in ways they weren't prepared for. "I'm sure it's nothing, honey. You know how Marcus gets dramatic about money." But Ashley had seen the words "paid off" in that brief notification, and she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened, it wasn't nothing. It was something big enough to make Marcus post and delete within minutes, something involving their grandmother and money in ways that didn't make sense. By the time Michael Smith arrived home from work, his back aching from a day of crawling through cramped spaces to rewire a downtown office building, the family communication network had already begun to fracture. Ashley had called Linda 3 times. Linda had tried calling Marcus twice and Amara once, getting voicemail each time. Emma had noticed the adult's strange energy, but kept her observations to herself, the way she'd learned to do when family tensions rose. Michael found Linda in the kitchen, stress cooking with the manic energy that meant she was trying to solve problems she couldn't control through aggressive meal preparation. "What's got you making enough food for an army?" he asked, kissing her cheek and noting the way her shoulders remained tense. "Ashley thinks something's happened with your mother and Marcus, something about money." Michael's protective instincts kicked in immediately. His mother was proud, independent, and stubborn enough to hide serious problems rather than burden her family. But she was also 78 years old, living alone, managing on what he assumed was a modest fixed income. What kind of something? "I don't know." Marcus posted something on social media, then deleted it. Ashley only caught part of it. Before Michael could respond, Ashley's car pulled into the driveway with the aggressive energy of someone who'd driven across town, fueled entirely by anxiety and unanswered questions. She burst through the front door without knocking, her artist's intuition telling her that whatever was happening, it was bigger than bounced checks or medical bills. "Have you talked to him?" she demanded, not bothering with greetings. "Ashley, breathe," Linda said, though her own breathing was anything but calm. "We don't even know if anything's actually wrong. Something's wrong, I can feel it." Ashley pulled out her phone, showing them the notification screen. "Look at this. Student loans paid off grandmother." "What does that even mean?" Quote, Michael studied the partial screenshot, his mind working through possibilities. "Maybe she co-signed something. Maybe there's a problem with—" His phone rang. Marcus's name on the screen. "Dad?" Marcus's voice sounded strange, hollow, and overwhelmed. "Is Ashley there? Can you put me on speaker?" Michael exchanged glances with Linda and Ashley before complying. "We're all here, son. What's going on?" The silence that followed stretched long enough for them to wonder if the call had dropped. When Marcus finally spoke, his words came out in a rush. "Gran paid off my student loans. All of them. In cash. She just showed up at my apartment with a briefcase full of money and… His voice cracked. She's rich. Like, really rich. Millionaire rich. And I had no idea. The kitchen went silent. Linda stopped stirring. Ashley sat down hard in the nearest chair. Michael felt something shift in his chest, a combination of relief and confusion, and something else he couldn't quite name. "That's impossible," Ashley whispered. "I'm looking at the money right now," Marcus said. $127,000. She said she's worth over $3 million. Ashley's relief that her brother's financial problems were solved lasted approximately 30 seconds before it was replaced by something much darker. $3 million. Their grandmother had $3 million and had watched Ashley struggle with credit card debt, had watched her move back home twice, had never once offered to help with her own crushing financial anxiety. "She never said anything," Linda's voice was faint. "All those times I offered to help with groceries, worried about her heating bills." Michael felt a strange combination of pride and betrayal. His mother had built something impressive, had achieved the kind of financial security he'd never managed, despite working his entire adult life. But she'd also watched him worry about early retirement, had seen his winces when his back flared up, had known that one serious injury could devastate their family's finances. "Why wouldn't she tell us?" he asked, and the hurt in his voice was clear even through the phone. "She said we all treat her like she's failing," Marcus replied quietly. "Like she's someone who needs to be managed and helped, instead of someone who's actually more successful than any of us." Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her teenage radar having detected the family crisis from upstairs. She took in the scene, the adults clustered around the phone, the mixture of shock and hurt and confusion on their faces, and immediately understood that whatever was happening, it was going to change everything. "So what happens now?" Ashley asked, and there was an edge to her voice that made everyone look at her. "Marcus gets his loans paid off, and the rest of us just pretend we don't know that Gran could solve all our problems but chooses not to." The question hung in the air like smoke, toxic and spreading. Because that was exactly what they were all thinking, even if none of them wanted to admit it. Amara had the power to help, had always had the power to help, and had chosen not to. The reasons might be complex, might even be wise, but the hurt was simple and immediate. "Ashley," Linda warned, recognizing the tone that meant her daughter was about to say something that couldn't be taken back. "No, Mom, I'm serious. We've all been struggling, and she's been sitting on millions of dollars? That's not quirky or independent. That's selfish." Quote, through the phone, Marcus's voice was quiet. "It's not that simple, isn't it?" Ashley stood up, pacing now. "You made one stupid comment about money, and suddenly you're debt-free. What does the rest of the family have to do to earn her help? Because apparently working 3 jobs and living in my parents' garage isn't enough." The family meeting that Linda had been dreading since Ashley's first phone call was about to happen, whether she wanted it or not. Because money, as they were all discovering, had a way of revealing truths that everyone preferred to keep hidden. And Amara's secret had just exposed every financial insecurity, every buried resentment, every assumption about fairness and family obligation that the Smiths had been carefully avoiding for years. The ripple effect was just beginning. The family meeting had been scheduled for Thursday evening, giving everyone 3 days to process the revelation about Amara's wealth. 3 days that felt like 3 years to Linda, who found herself lying awake each night wondering how she'd missed the signs of her mother-in-law's financial success. 3 days during which Ashley alternated between fury and hurt, her artistic temperament unable to settle on a single emotion. 3 days that Michael spent in his garage workshop, using the rhythm of familiar tasks to avoid thinking about the implications of his mother's secret. None of them were prepared for Danny Smith to show up on Tuesday afternoon. Amara was in her garden, deadheading roses with the same methodical patience she brought to everything else, when she heard the motorcycle rumbling down Maple Street. The sound was distinctive, too loud, too aggressive for the quiet neighborhood, and it stopped directly in front of her house. She didn't look up immediately. 30 years of living on the same street had taught her that most problems solved themselves if you didn't give them attention. But when the engine cut off and footsteps approached her front gate, she recognized the walk before she saw the face. Danny had inherited his father's stride, confident, loose-limbed, with just enough swagger to suggest he'd never met a situation he couldn't charm his way through. At 49, he still moved like the high school athlete he'd been, though the years of inconsistent work and harder living had softened his edges and lined his face. "Hey, Ma." His smile was the same one that had gotten him out of trouble since he was 6 years old. Wide, genuine, and completely disarming. "Heard you've been spreading some wealth around the family?" Amara straightened slowly, her gardening gloves still dusty with soil. "Danny, this is unexpected." "Yeah, well, you know me. Never was good at calling ahead." He pushed through the gate without invitation, his eyes already scanning the modest house and yard with the appraising look of someone calculating values. "Nice place, real nice. Bet it's worth a pretty penny these days." She recognized the tone. It was the same one he'd used when he'd asked to borrow money for his ex-wife's medical bills, for his truck payment, for the sure-thing construction job that would get him back on his feet. The same tone that preceded every broken promise and disappeared paycheck. "How did you hear about Marcus?" she asked, though she already knew. Family news traveled through the Smith network like water finding cracks, and Danny had always been good at positioning himself to catch the overflow. "Ashley called me yesterday. Girl's pretty upset." He leaned against her garden fence, radiating the casual confidence of someone about to make a reasonable request. "Can't say I blame her. Sounds like there's been some surprises lately." Amara continued her gardening, using the familiar motions to center herself. 40 years of investment research had taught her to recognize manipulation tactics, and Danny's approach was textbook: establish common ground, create urgency, then present the solution that benefited him. "Ashley has every right to feel however she feels," Amara said carefully. "She sure does. Especially when her big brother gets a 6-figure gift while she's eating ramen noodles in her parents' garage." Danny's voice carried just the right note of sympathetic outrage. "Makes a person wonder about fairness, you know? About family loyalty." There it was, the setup. Amara had been expecting this conversation since the moment she'd walked out of Marcus's apartment, but she'd hoped she might have more time to prepare. "What do you want, Danny?" His laugh was rueful, self-deprecating. "Always could see right through me, couldn't you? Guess that's how you got so good with money." He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a photo of 2 children. "You remember Jake and Sarah, my kids?" Amara did remember them. 8 and 10 years old, living with their mother in Cincinnati, seeing their father maybe 3 times a year, when Danny managed to scrape together gas money and child support. "They're getting older, Ma. Jake's talking about wanting to play hockey, and Sarah's got this art thing going on. Reminds me of Ashley when she was that age. But their mom..." He shook his head, the picture of a father struggling against circumstances beyond his control. "She's doing her best, but it's just her, you know? And I'm trying to help, but construction work's been slow, and the truck needs new brakes, and..." The story was plausible. It was even partially true, which was what made Danny dangerous. He wasn't a complete fabricator. He was someone who took real problems and real emotions and weaponized them into requests for money that somehow never solved anything permanently. "How much?" Amara asked bluntly. Danny's eyes lit up, recognizing the shift from resistance to negotiation. "25,000 would change everything. I could catch up on the support payments, fix the truck, maybe put some aside for the kids' activities. Get back on my feet properly this time." "This time. I know what you're thinking. I know I've made mistakes before. But this is different, Ma. I'm clean now, been going to meetings, got a sponsor. This isn't about gambling or drinking or any of that old stuff. This is about being the father my kids deserve." Amara set down her gardening shears and really looked at her younger son. He was clean. She could see that. The hollow look that had haunted his eyes during the worst of his addiction was gone, replaced by something clearer. But clarity wasn't the same as wisdom, and sobriety wasn't the same as responsibility. "You've been clean before, Danny. Not like this. This time I've got the tools, the support system. And with a little help I could really make something work." Maybe start my own construction business, be my own boss. You know how good I am with my hands. He was good with his hands. He was also good with excuses, with grand plans that required just a little more money than he currently had, with promises that sounded reasonable until you remembered the pattern of previous promises. Why didn't you ask Michael for help? Danny's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something less charming. Come on, Ma. You know Mike doesn't have that kind of money. Hell, none of us knew you had that kind of money until Marcus got his windfall. The word windfall grated against Amara's nerves. As if Marcus's debt relief had been luck rather than a deliberate lesson about assumptions and respect. And if I say no? Danny's smile never wavered, but something cold moved behind his eyes. Then I guess Ashley's right to feel like there's favorites in this family. Marcus gets $127,000 for being rude at dinner, but his uncle can't get help to see his own kids. That's going to be a hard story for people to understand. There it was, the threat wrapped in reasonableness, the implication that family harmony depended on financial compliance. Amara had been wondering when Danny would show his true hand. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus was discovering that sudden wealth came with its own complications. The relief of having his student loans paid off had lasted exactly 48 hours before being replaced by something much more complex, a crushing sense of obligation mixed with paralyzing uncertainty about what to do next. His first instinct had been to pay Amara back immediately, but that impulse had led him down a rabbit hole of research into get-rich-quick investment strategies that made him feel sick to his stomach. Cryptocurrency speculation, penny stocks, options trading, every search result promised to turn his remaining savings into enough money to repay his grandmother within months. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was trying to learn in weeks what she'd spent decades mastering, driven by the same impatience and arrogance that had gotten him into trouble in the first place. By Tuesday afternoon, he'd lost $800 in a cryptocurrency gamble that had seemed foolproof based on a Reddit thread and a YouTube video. By Tuesday evening, he was staring at his phone, wondering if he should call his grandmother to confess his latest financial mistake. Instead, he called his father. "Dad, can we talk?" Michael was in his workshop, trying to lose himself in the meditative process of sanding a piece of oak that would become Emma's graduation gift. The familiar smell of wood shavings and the rhythm of the work usually centered him, but nothing felt normal anymore. "What's on your mind, son?" "I think I'm making mistakes. With the money situation, I mean. I've been trying to figure out how to pay Gran back, and I keep doing stupid things." Michael stopped sanding. "What kind of stupid things?" The confession came out in a rush. The cryptocurrency losses, the research into risky investments, the growing certainty that he was going to disappoint his grandmother all over again by proving he couldn't handle financial responsibility. "Marcus, stop." Michael's voice was firm. "You're trying to solve the wrong problem." "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother didn't give you that money because she expected you to pay her back. She gave it to you to teach you something. The lesson isn't about making more money faster. It's about understanding what money actually means." Through the phone, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I don't think I understand anything anymore." "Neither do I, son. Neither do I." As they talked, neither of them knew that 3 miles away, Danny Smith was making his pitch to their family matriarch, testing the boundaries of love and manipulation with the skill of someone who'd been walking that line his entire adult life. Amara listened to her younger son's request, weighing 20 years of broken promises against the possibility that this time might be different. But in her heart, she already knew the answer. The only question was whether Danny would accept it gracefully, or whether this conversation was about to become the second family crisis in a week. The Smith family was about to learn that money didn't just reveal character. Sometimes it created situations where character was the only thing that mattered. Amara looked at her younger son for a long moment, seeing past the practiced charm to the desperation underneath. 20 years of broken promises, missed payments, and recycled excuses had taught her to recognize the difference between someone who needed help and someone who needed enabling. "No, Danny." The word fell between them like a stone into still water. Danny's smile faltered for just a moment before reassembling itself, though with considerably less warmth. "No." He laughed, but there was an edge to it now. "Just like that? No explanation, no consideration for your grandchildren you barely see? I have considered it very carefully. The answer is no. Danny's facade began to crack, revealing the anger that had been simmering beneath his reasonable requests. So Marcus gets a six-figure handout for being a spoiled brat, but I can't get help to see my own kids? That's how this family works now? Marcus's situation was about education. Bullshit. Danny stepped closer, his voice rising. Marcus's situation was about you having favorites. About you deciding which of your family members deserve help and which ones can go to hell. Amara remained perfectly still, her years of patient investment strategy having taught her not to react to market volatility, whether financial or emotional. You're upset. I understand that. Upset? Danny's laugh was bitter now. Ma, I'm broke. My kids need things I can't provide, and you're sitting on millions of dollars. But because I've made some mistakes. Some mistakes? Amara's voice carried a steel that made Danny take a step back. 3 arrests for gambling-related offenses. 2 bankruptcies. 14 separate times you've asked family members for money and failed to pay it back. That's not some mistakes, Danny. That's a pattern. I'm in recovery now. You've been in recovery 4 times. You had a sponsor before. You had the tools and the support system before. Amara's composure never wavered, but her words cut deep. What you've never had is the willingness to accept that your problems aren't solved by other people's money. Danny's mask slipped completely. Fine. You want to be selfish with your money. That's your choice. But don't expect this family to stay together when everyone finds out how you really are. And how am I, Danny? A hypocrite. You lecture us about values and family, but when it comes down to it, you only help the people who make you feel good about yourself. Marcus makes you feel wise and generous. I make you feel like a fool for believing in me. The accusation hung in the air, and for a moment Amara felt its weight. Because, wasn't there some truth to it? Hadn't she chosen to help Marcus because his problems felt solvable, his mistakes correctable? You're right about one thing, she said quietly. I do feel foolish for believing in you. Not because you're not worth believing in, but because I've confused enabling with love for too many years. Danny stared at her, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. You're going to regret this, Ma. When this family falls apart, when everyone sees you for what you really are, you'll remember this conversation. He turned and walked away, his motorcycle roaring to life with unnecessary aggression. As he disappeared down Maple Street, Amara remained in her garden, shaking slightly from the confrontation but certain of her decision. 3 hours later, Ashley Smith was having the worst day of a particularly bad week. Her latest gallery submission had been rejected, her credit card payment had bounced, and she'd just discovered that her part-time job at the coffee shop was being eliminated due to restructuring. She was stress cleaning her tiny studio space when her phone rang. Danny's name on the screen. Uncle Danny? Hey, kiddo. Heard you've been having a rough time lately. Something in his tone put her on guard. What do you mean? With the family situation. The money thing. Can't say I'm surprised. I just had an interesting conversation with your grandmother myself. Ashley sank onto her paint-stained couch. What kind of conversation? The kind where I found out that family loyalty only goes one way in this house. Marcus gets his loans paid off, but when I ask for help to see my kids, suddenly there's no money available. The unfairness of it hit Ashley like a physical blow. Here was someone else who'd been denied help, while Marcus got handed a fortune for being disrespectful. She said no. Flat out. $25,000 to help me catch up on child support and fix my truck, so I can work more consistently. But apparently I'm not the right kind of family member. Ashley felt her anger crystallizing into something harder, sharper. This is insane. We're all struggling, and she just sits on millions of dollars deciding who's worthy of help. That's what I'm saying. And between you and me, I think the rest of the family deserves to know what they're dealing with. Your parents, Emma, they should understand that this isn't about helping family. This is about control. By the time Ashley hung up, her mind was racing. The injustice of the situation felt overwhelming. Marcus rewarded for his rudeness while she and Danny were left to struggle. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Meanwhile, Marcus was learning his own painful lessons about financial responsibility. His latest attempt to invest wisely had involved following a stock tip from a coworker, resulting in another $1,200 in losses. He stared at his account balance, realizing he'd managed to lose $2,000 in 3 days while trying to prove he understood money. The irony was crushing. His grandmother had given him financial freedom, and he was squandering it through the same impulsive decision-making that had gotten him into debt in the first place. When his phone rang and Ashley's name appeared, he almost didn't answer. "Marcus, we need to talk, all of us." "Ashley, if this is about Gran, it's about fairness. It's about the fact that you got 6 figures for insulting her while the rest of us get nothing for actually respecting her." Her voice carried a bitterness that made Marcus's stomach clench. "It's not that simple, isn't it? Danny just asked her for $25,000 to help with his kids, and she turned him down flat. Meanwhile, you're debt-free for being an ass at dinner." Marcus closed his eyes, understanding with horrible clarity how this looked from the outside. "Ashley, there's more to it than that. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like Gran has favorites, and the rest of us aren't on the list." The call ended with Ashley demanding a family meeting where everyone could air their grievances openly. As Marcus hung up, he realized that his grandmother's generous act hadn't solved anything. It had simply revealed problems that had been festering beneath the surface for years. Across town, Emma Johnson sat in her room, watching the family drama unfold through text messages and overheard phone calls. At 16, she understood something the adults seemed to miss. This wasn't really about money at all. It was about respect, assumptions, and the stories people told themselves about why they deserved things. But adults, she'd learned, rarely wanted to hear wisdom from teenagers. So she kept her observations to herself and waited for the explosion she could see coming. The Smith family was about to discover that money didn't just reveal character. Sometimes it shattered relationships that everyone had assumed were stronger than they actually were. Amara didn't sleep Wednesday night. She sat in Harold's old recliner, the one she'd kept in the living room for 12 years despite its worn upholstery and broken footrest, and watched the numbers on her laptop screen blur together. Market futures, dividend schedules, portfolio allocations, none of it could distract her from the growing certainty that her attempt to teach Marcus about money had instead taught her family how to tear itself apart. At 3:17 a.m., she closed the laptop and walked to her kitchen window, looking out at the garden she'd tended for 3 decades. The roses were blooming despite the late season, their deep red petals catching the streetlight like drops of blood. She'd planted them the year Harold died, needing something beautiful to focus on when grief threatened to overwhelm her practical nature. Now, surrounded by the financial security she'd built through patience and discipline, she felt more isolated than she had in years. The soft knock on her back door at 6:30 a.m. didn't surprise her. Frank Williams had a habit of early morning garden walks, and she'd seen him hesitate by her fence twice in the past week, clearly wanting to check on her but respecting her privacy. "Morning, Amara." His voice carried the gentle concern that had made him an exceptional teacher for 40 years. "Thought you might want some company with your coffee." She let him in, grateful for the presence of someone who didn't want anything from her except conversation. Frank had been widowed 3 years now, long enough to understand that sometimes the hardest part of loss wasn't the grief. It was the way it changed how everyone else saw you. "You look like you've been wrestling with something," he said, settling into Harold's chair as naturally as if he'd been invited. "Family," she said simply, pouring him coffee in Harold's favorite mug without asking if he wanted any. "The money situation Ashley mentioned at the grocery store?" Amara wasn't surprised that word had spread beyond the family. Millbrook was small enough that significant news traveled quickly, and Ashley's bitterness had been evident to anyone who knew her well. "I thought I was teaching a lesson about assumptions and respect," Amara said quietly. "Instead, I've created a situation where everyone feels entitled to judge my choices." Frank studied her face with the patience of someone who'd spent decades helping young people work through complex emotions. What was the lesson supposed to be? That Marcus didn't understand what real wealth meant. That living simply doesn't mean being poor. That maybe his grandmother wasn't as ignorant about money as he assumed. And what did he learn instead? Amara was quiet for a long moment. That assumptions work both ways. I assumed he would understand that the money came with responsibilities, that it was about more than debt relief. But he's been trying to pay me back through risky investments, losing money as fast as he can find it. What about the rest of the family? Ashley thinks I play favorites. Danny thinks I owe him help because I helped Marcus. Michael feels betrayed that I never told him about the money when he was struggling. She set down her coffee, her hands steadier than her voice. They're all right, Frank. In different ways, they're all right. Frank was quiet for a while, watching her process emotions she'd been avoiding for days. You know what I think? Tell me. I think you've been carrying this burden alone for so long that you forgot families are supposed to share burdens. You built wealth to protect yourself from vulnerability, but wealth without connection just creates a different kind of vulnerability. The words hit harder than Danny's threats or Ashley's anger because they came without agenda, offered by someone who understood both her achievements and her isolation. So what do I do now? Talk to them, not about money, about what you're actually afraid of. 3 miles away, Marcus was having his own moment of revelation. He'd just confessed his investment losses to his parents, expecting disappointment but finding instead something more complex, a mixture of sympathy and recognition. You know what this reminds me of? Michael said, sitting across from his son at the kitchen table, where Marcus had eaten countless meals as a child. When I was 25 and convinced I could renovate this entire house in 6 months. Spent $3,000 we didn't have on tools and materials, then had to hire contractors to fix what I'd broken. Dad, this is different. Is it? You got scared about owing something you couldn't quantify, so you tried to take a shortcut that made everything worse. Michael's smile was rueful. Pride makes us all stupid sometimes, son. Linda set down coffee for both of them, her counselor's instincts recognizing a teaching moment. Marcus, what do you think your grandmother actually wanted from you? The question stopped him cold. In all his frantic attempts to pay her back, he'd never considered what she might actually want. I don't know, he admitted. Meanwhile, Emma Johnson was having conversations of her own. As the only family member not directly impacted by Amara's financial revelation, she'd become an unexpected confidant for both Ashley and her parents. You know what I think is funny? She said to Ashley as they walked to the coffee shop where Ashley used to work. Everyone's mad about fairness, but nobody's asked Gran what she thinks is fair. Ashley stopped walking. What do you mean? I mean, maybe she helped Marcus because he actually talked to her about his problems. When's the last time you had a real conversation with her about anything besides art and weather? The question stung because Emma was right. Ashley had been so focused on maintaining her independence that she'd never actually asked for help, financial or otherwise. And Uncle Danny, Emma continued with the brutal honesty of 16, he's been asking for money for 20 years. Maybe she's tired of being an ATM. That evening, as 3 separate Smith family members lay awake thinking about Emma's words, Amara made a decision. She picked up her phone and sent a text to the family group chat that Linda had created months ago. Family meeting tomorrow night, my house, 7 p.m. We need to talk about what really matters. The message went out to 6 phones and created 6 different reactions: anxiety, anger, hope, dread, curiosity, and, in Emma's case, satisfaction that the adults were finally going to have the conversation they should have started with. But this time, Amara was determined the conversation would be about more than money. It would be about the difference between helping and enabling, between love and obligation, and about whether the Smith family could find their way back to each other before pride and assumptions destroyed what they'd built together. The reckoning was coming, and for the first time in days, Amara felt ready for it. Thursday evening brought an unseasonable chill to Millbrook, and Amara found herself adjusting the thermostat twice before 7 o'clock. Nervous energy, she realized, something she hadn't felt since her first investment portfolio review 40 years ago. She'd arranged chairs in her living room in a circle, rather than the traditional hierarchical setup of previous family gatherings, a small change that felt significant. Marcus arrived first, carrying a manila folder and wearing the expression of someone preparing for a performance review. Linda and Michael came next, their quiet conversation cutting off abruptly when they saw the formal seating arrangement. Ashley entered with Emma, both of them noting the careful staging with different degrees of cynicism. "Thank you all for coming," Amara began, her voice steadier than her hands. "I know this week has been difficult for everyone." "That's one way to put it," Ashley muttered, earning a warning look from Linda. Amara nodded, accepting the hostility as part of what needed to be addressed. "Before we talk about money, I want to tell you something I should have shared years ago. When your grandfather died, I was terrified." The admission hung in the air, unexpected. This wasn't the composed, self-reliant woman they knew. Not of being alone. "I knew I could handle that. I was terrified of becoming a burden. Of having you all feel obligated to take care of me financially because I hadn't taken care of myself." Her voice grew quieter. "So I decided to learn everything I could about building wealth. Not for luxury or status, but for independence." Michael shifted in his chair. "Ma, you never would have been a burden." "Wouldn't I? Michael, you've been worried about early retirement since you turned 50. Linda, you're still paying off student loans for a degree you earned 15 years ago. Ashley, you're living in your parents' garage because you can't afford rent." Her tone wasn't accusatory, just factual. "How could I add my needs to that equation?" Emma spoke up quietly. "So you decided to handle everything yourself?" "Yes, but somewhere along the way, independence became isolation. I stopped sharing my struggles because I could afford to solve them alone. I stopped sharing my successes because—" She paused, searching for words. "Because I was afraid you'd see me differently." Marcus opened his folder, revealing printed pages. "Gran, I need to tell you something. I've lost over $2,000 this week, trying to pay you back through investments I didn't understand." The confession dropped into the circle like a stone. Linda gasped softly. Michael closed his eyes. "I was so ashamed of taking your money that I tried to prove I could be as smart as you with it. Instead, I proved I'm exactly as impulsive and ignorant as you probably thought." Marcus's voice cracked. "I'm sorry. For Sunday night, for this week, for not understanding what you were actually trying to teach me." Amara felt tears threatening. "Marcus, the money wasn't a loan, it was a gift. A terrible, misguided gift that I gave for the wrong reasons." "What do you mean?" Ashley asked, her anger temporarily replaced by confusion. "I gave it to you because you hurt me, and I wanted to prove you wrong. That's not generosity, that's pride. That's exactly the kind of emotional decision-making I spent 40 years learning to avoid in investing." Linda leaned forward. "So what would generosity look like?" The question hung in the air as Amara considered it. "Honesty, I think. About what I can afford to help with and what I can't. About the difference between helping someone grow and enabling them to stay stuck. About admitting that having money doesn't make me wise about family relationships." Ashley had been quiet, but now her composure cracked. "I've been so angry with you. But really, I'm angry with myself. I'm 28 years old, living with my parents, watching my brother get handed a fortune while I can't afford to fix my car. And instead of asking for help, I just resented everyone." "What kind of help do you need?" Amara asked gently. "I don't even know anymore. I've been so focused on proving I could make it as an artist that I never learned how to make it as an adult." Ashley wiped her eyes. "Maybe I need help figuring out what I actually want, not just money to keep failing at the same things." Michael had been listening with growing understanding. "I think we all need to learn how to ask for help. Real help, not just money when things get bad." Quote, "And we need to learn how to say no," Emma added, surprising everyone with her directness. "Like with Uncle Danny. Sometimes the most loving thing is refusing to enable someone." Amara nodded. "Danny asked for $25,000. I said no, and he threatened to turn the family against me. Some of that threat has already come true." "He called me," Ashley admitted. "Made it sound like you were playing favorites, like Marcus got rewarded for being mean while he got punished for asking." "What do you think now?" Amara asked. Ashley was quiet for a long moment. I think Uncle Danny has been asking for money for 20 years and never solving his actual problems. And I think I was ready to be angry with you because it was easier than being honest about my own situation. Linda spoke up. I think we need to establish some boundaries. About money, about expectations, about how we communicate when things get difficult. What would that look like? Michael asked. Maybe family meetings that happen before crises, not after them, Emma suggested. Maybe honest conversations about money, instead of everyone pretending their problems don't exist. Marcus looked around the circle. And maybe some of us need to learn that real wealth isn't about how much you can spend, but about having choices. About being able to help people you love without destroying yourself or enabling them. Amara felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. I want to help all of you. But I want to help in ways that actually help, not just ways that make me feel better about having money. How do we figure out the difference? Ashley asked. Together, Amara said simply. We figure it out together. We talk about what real support looks like, what healthy boundaries mean, and how to love each other without money being the main language. As the meeting continued, moving from confrontation to collaboration, the Smith family began to discover something they'd lost in the chaos of the past week. The ability to be honest with each other about their fears, their mistakes, and their hopes for something better. The money would always be part of their story now, but it didn't have to be the whole story. That would take work, patience, and the kind of long-term thinking that Amara had learned in 40 years of careful investing. But for the first time in days, it felt possible. 6 weeks after the family meeting, Marcus stood in the doorway of a studio apartment that cost $800 less per month than his previous place. The space was smaller, the view was of a parking lot instead of downtown skyline, but for the first time in years, he could pay his rent without anxiety. It's perfect, he told his mother over the phone and meant it. The transition hadn't been easy. Moving from his luxury building had required swallowing considerable pride, especially when coworkers noticed his new address. But each month that passed without the crushing weight of student loan payments had taught him something his MBA program had somehow missed. Financial peace was worth more than financial appearance. He'd also learned to call his grandmother every Sunday, not about money, but about everything else. Their conversations had become something he looked forward to. Her investment wisdom, mixing with stories about his grandfather, and gentle questions about Marcus's goals that went beyond quarterly earnings. I'm thinking about starting a side business, he told Amara during one of these calls. Financial literacy coaching for recent graduates. Help them avoid the mistakes I made. That sounds meaningful, she'd replied. What would you need to get started? The conversation that followed was different from any they'd had before. Practical, collaborative, focused on sustainable growth rather than quick fixes. Amara had offered to be a practice client, letting Marcus test his coaching approach on someone who actually understood money. Meanwhile, Ashley had made changes that surprised everyone, starting with herself. The therapy sessions Linda had quietly offered to pay for had helped her understand that her financial chaos wasn't about lack of income. It was about lack of planning and fear of making adult decisions. She'd kept the job at the coffee shop when the restructuring turned out to be negotiable, but added a second part-time position teaching art classes at the community center. The work paid less than she'd once hoped to earn, but it was steady, and she discovered she actually enjoyed teaching. I think I want to go back to school, she told her parents over dinner at their house, a weekly tradition she'd started after the family meeting. Art therapy program at the state university. It would mean more loans, but this time I'd have a plan. Michael and Linda had exchanged glances before Linda smiled. Tell us about the plan. The conversation that followed was everything their family meetings were supposed to be. Honest about costs, realistic about timeline, supportive without being enabling. Ashley had done her research, understood the job market, and for the first time in her adult life, was making decisions based on careful analysis rather than artistic passion alone. The real test of the family's new dynamics came on a Thursday evening when Danny appeared at Michael and Linda's house, unannounced and clearly agitated. I need to talk to someone who'll listen, he said, his charm notably absent. Ma won't take my calls, and everyone else acts like I'm toxic. Linda had invited him in but called Michael from his workshop and texted the family group chat, a transparency they'd agreed upon after learning about manipulation tactics. Within 20 minutes, Emma was listening from the kitchen while the adults gathered in the living room. "The truck broke down completely," Danny began. "I can't work without it, can't see my kids, can't—" "How much?" Michael interrupted, his tone neutral but firm. "It's not about money this time." "Well, it is, but—" Danny stopped, recognizing that his usual approach wasn't working. "Okay, yes, it's about money. $3,000 for repairs, or $5,000 for a used replacement." "What's your plan for paying it back?" Ashley asked, surprising everyone by speaking up. "I'll work more hours once I have transportation." "That's not a plan," Emma called from the kitchen. "That's hope." The conversation that followed was unlike any the family had ever had with Danny. Instead of immediate refusal or reluctant agreement, they asked questions. About his recovery program, his job prospects, his actual relationship with his children, his pattern of financial crisis. "I think," Michael said finally, "we need to call Ma and have this conversation together. As a family." Danny's face tightened. "She's already made her position clear." "That was before we learned how to talk to each other," Linda said gently. "Maybe it's time to try again." The conference call with Amara that evening was tense, but productive. Danny's request was discussed openly, with questions about accountability, realistic timelines, and what success would actually look like. "I'll loan you $1,500 for a used truck," Amara said finally, "with a written agreement for monthly payments and conditions about staying in your recovery program. Miss 2 payments or drop out of counseling, and we're done permanently." It wasn't what Danny had asked for, but it was more than he'd expected given their last conversation. More importantly, it came with clear boundaries that everyone understood. After Danny left, the family sat quietly in Linda's living room, processing what had just happened. "That felt different," Marcus said. "Harder," Ashley added, "but more honest." Emma appeared in the doorway. He didn't like it, but he didn't storm out either. "Maybe that's progress." Amara's voice came through the phone speaker, tired but determined. "We'll see. Real change takes time. For all of us." As the family said their goodbyes and ended the call, each of them understood that they'd passed their first real test of the new boundaries they'd established. It hadn't been perfect, but it had been honest, collaborative, and focused on long-term solutions rather than short-term fixes. The work of rebuilding trust and establishing healthy patterns would continue, but tonight felt like proof that such work was possible. The September evening carried the first hint of autumn, when the Smith family gathered in Amara's dining room for what had become a monthly tradition. 6 months had passed since that transformative Thursday night meeting, and the changes were evident in everything from the relaxed conversation to the way they'd naturally arranged themselves around the table. Marcus arrived carrying a bottle of wine, not the expensive kind he used to buy to impress others, but a modest local vintage he'd discovered and genuinely enjoyed. His new apartment had taught him the difference between quality and cost, a lesson that extended far beyond housing into every aspect of his financial life. "How's the coaching business?" Amara asked as he settled into his chair. "Growing steadily. I've got 12 regular clients now, and the community college wants me to teach a financial literacy course next semester." His smile was genuine, free of the anxious energy that had once dominated his demeanor. "Turns out there's real satisfaction in helping people avoid the mistakes I made." Ashley entered with Emma, both of them animated in conversation about Emma's college experience. The scholarship Ashley had helped Emma apply for had covered most of her tuition, but more importantly, the process had taught Ashley about researching opportunities rather than hoping for luck. "How's the art therapy program treating you?" Linda asked, noting the paint under Ashley's fingernails and the contentment in her expression. "Challenging, but good challenging. I'm learning as much about myself as I am about helping others." Ashley had started the program in August, financing it through a combination of savings from her steady work and a small loan from Amara that came with a detailed repayment plan and regular progress meetings. Working with kids who've experienced trauma, It puts everything in perspective. Michael arrived last, moving more slowly than usual but without the wincing that had marked his gait a year ago. The back surgery in July had been successful, paid for through a combination of insurance and careful financial planning that included an emergency fund he'd finally built with Amara's guidance. "You look good, Dad," Marcus observed, noting the absence of tension in his father's shoulders. "I feel good. Weird to not be worried about work for the first time in years." Michael had taken early retirement after all, but on his terms rather than circumstances. The financial planning sessions with Amara had revealed possibilities he'd never considered. Ways to make his pension and savings stretch further than he'd thought possible. As they settled around the table, Linda looked at the scene with the satisfaction of someone watching a plan come together. The weekly family dinners had evolved into monthly gatherings at Amara's house, with quarterly financial check-ins that had become as natural as discussing the weather. "Any word from Danny?" Emma asked, demonstrating the directness that had become her trademark in family discussions. "He made his payment this month," Amara replied. 3 months in a row now. And he's been consistent with his counseling sessions. The conditional loan for Danny's truck had surprised everyone by actually working. Not because Danny had suddenly become reliable, but because the family had finally learned to set boundaries that were both clear and enforceable. When he'd missed his second payment, they'd stuck to their agreement despite his protests and promises. When he'd gotten back on track, they'd acknowledged his effort without changing the terms. "I saw him at the grocery store last week," Linda added. "He looked stable. Not charming stable, just actually stable." "Progress," Amara said simply, understanding that Danny's journey would be longer and more complicated than anyone else's, but that enabling his failures wasn't the same as supporting his recovery. The dinner conversation flowed between updates and plans, family news, and gentle financial discussions that had lost their edge of anxiety. Marcus shared his goal of buying a small house within 2 years, outlining a savings plan that prioritized realistic timeline over impressive mortgage. Ashley talked about her internship placement for the following semester, working with veterans struggling with PTSD through art therapy. "That sounds meaningful," Frank Williams said, appearing in the doorway with a casserole dish and the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd become part of the family's rhythm. Frank's presence at these gatherings had evolved naturally over the months, his quiet wisdom and genuine affection for Amara adding stability to a family still learning to trust their new dynamics. He wasn't replacing Harold. Nobody could do that, but he was filling a space that had been empty for too long. "Frank, tell them about your garden project," Amara said, her voice carrying a warmth that made Emma smile. "It's not much," Frank said modestly, though his eyes lit up. "Just helping some of the senior center folks start a community garden behind the library. Turns out vegetables taste better when you grow them yourself." As dinner progressed, the conversation naturally turned to Emma's upcoming graduation and college plans. The financial aid package she'd assembled was impressive: scholarships, grants, and a work-study program that would allow her to graduate debt-free if she maintained her grades and budget carefully. "I've been thinking about majoring in financial planning," Emma announced, earning surprised looks from around the table. "Watching all of you figure out money stuff this year. I realized how much most people don't know about basic financial literacy. Maybe I could help change that." Marcus grinned. "We could be business partners someday. Financial coaching and comprehensive planning." "Let's see if I survive freshman year first," Emma laughed, but her interest was genuine. Living with the Smith family during their financial awakening had given her insights most 18-year-olds never gained. As they cleared the dinner dishes, Marcus found himself helping his grandmother with a task that would have felt charged with obligation 6 months ago, but now felt simply natural. Their relationship had found its footing in regular communication and mutual respect, rather than the complex dynamics of debt and gratitude. "Gran, can I ask you something that's been on my mind?" "Of course." "That night at dinner, when I said you didn't understand real money, did you already know you were going to pay off my loans?" Amara considered the question while drying a wine glass with care. "No. That decision came later, when I realized you'd never learned to see past appearances to understand what wealth actually means. I thought showing you might be more effective than telling you." "Was it? Effective, I mean?" "The money solved your immediate problem, but it didn't teach you anything useful. That only happened when you started making mistakes with your remaining savings and had to confront your own assumptions about success. Marcus nodded, understanding something that had taken months to crystallize. The real lesson wasn't about your wealth. It was about my ignorance. The real lesson was about both of us learning to see each other clearly instead of making assumptions based on appearances. They rejoined the family in the living room, where the conversation had turned to holiday plans and Ashley's art show in November. The evening felt different from that Sunday dinner 8 months ago, not just because of the changed circumstances, but because of the changed people. When Michael mentioned his concern about property taxes increasing, the discussion that followed was collaborative rather than anxious. When Ashley worried about balancing school costs with living expenses, the family brainstormed solutions instead of enabling poor decisions. When Emma asked about college loan strategies, they shared knowledge rather than warnings. "You know what I realized tonight?" Linda said as the evening wound down. "We've learned to talk about money the way we talk about everything else, honestly, but without drama." "Speak for yourself," Ashley teased. "I'm still plenty dramatic about everything else." The laughter that followed felt genuine, free of the undercurrents of resentment and misunderstanding that had poisoned previous family gatherings. As they said their goodbyes and made plans for Ashley's art show, each family member carried with them the knowledge that they'd built something sustainable, not just individual financial stability, but collective emotional security. Amara stood in her doorway, watching Frank help Emma carry leftover casserole to her car while Marcus and Ashley debated the merits of different investment apps. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman with substantial wealth and profound loneliness, convinced that financial independence required emotional isolation. Tonight, surrounded by family members who saw her clearly and loved her authentically, she understood that real wealth had never been about the numbers in her portfolio. It had always been about having the resources, financial and emotional, to support the people who mattered most in ways that helped them grow rather than keeping them dependent. The lesson Marcus had needed to learn about real money had become a lesson they'd all needed to learn about real family. And like the best investments, it was paying dividends that would compound for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,